Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in Modern. Today we're looking at Kuldotha Red. Kuldotha Red is the name for red aggro decks with an artifact focus, specifically taking its name from the card Kuldotha Rebirth. The plan is to spew out many cheap creatures quickly, sacrificing your own artifacts to Kuldotha Rebirth or Gleeful Demolition to make 3 tokens, then swing in for a ton of damage by pumping the team with one of the Bushwhacker Goblins or via Castle Embereth or Contested Warzone. The deck can also close out the game with various burn spells like Goblin Grenade, Shrapnel Blast, or good ol' Lightning Bolt. Typical artifacts run as sacrifice fodder will either be 0 mana, like Memnite and Mishra's Bauble so you can get 3 tokens on turn 1, or 1 mana artifacts that gain value from sacrificing them such as Chromatic Star, Experimental Synthesizer, or Implement of Combustion. The blood token made by Voldaren Epicure also counts. There are also more artifact-centric versions of the deck that run other cards like Bowmat Courier, Galvanic Blast, or Urza's Saga. This is an aggro deck through and through and operates similarly to Burn, trying to race down the opponent with its creatures and finishing anyone who stabilizes with damage spells. The main difference is that Kuldotha Red relies more on synergy, and thus, while it has more explosive openings and bigger late-game burn spells, it's less consistent. For example, if either deck is disrupted, Burn can still top-deck useful burn spells and haste creatures, whereas Kuldotha Red may be stuck with 1/1 Memnites and the like. Speaking of, the best way to fight Kuldotha Red is just kill everything it plays or produce a ton of blockers. Some of the most efficient cards are split damage spells like Fury or other cheap sweepers. Although Kuldotha Red has some ability to refuel with cards like Experimental Synthesizer, it fares poorly in the mid to late game since it's highly reliant on its opening hand and needs to deploy a critical mass of resources. As an aside, Kuldotha Red, which may have previously been known as 8-Whack, is probably the most competitive deck in the format relative to how cheap it is, coming in at around $200. Tips and tricks. Many of the cards in the deck require synergies with other resources, so it's important to know what hands you can keep and what you should use your cards for. Kuldotha Rebirth and Gleeful Demolition require an artifact to sacrifice. The Bushwhackers need multiple other creatures in play, and the artifacts are primarily sack fodder but have other uses as well. Mishra's Bauble draws a card, you can rummage with blood tokens, etc. Essentially, you should practice until you know what to use your cards for and when. There are some important differences between Rebirth and Demolition. Rebirth sacrifices the artifact as part of the cost to cast it, meaning if your opponent counters it, you'll still lose the artifact, but the same isn't true for Demolition. On the other hand, Demolition targets, meaning if its target is eliminated before it resolves, you won't get the tokens. Basically, you should be aware of whether your opponent may have a counterspell or instant speed answer to the artifact, and if you have the choice between casting either Rebirth or Demolition, cast the one that's less vulnerable. For example, if you're playing against a deck like Murktide that has counterspells but probably few answers to artifacts, you should cast Demolition into open mana, and Rebirth when their shields are down to avoid getting countered later. Gleeful Demolition can also target and destroy enemy artifacts without giving your opponent tokens, something Rebirth can't do. This can be relevant when playing against artifacts like Amulet of Vigor, for example. If you play indestructible artifacts like Darksteel Citadel, you can target them with Demolition and still get the tokens. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Kuldotha Red. Thank you to my supporters, and if you enjoy these videos, consider supporting the channel, and take care.